Hey, I've just watched an interesting, segment of an interview. Probably wasn't the whole interview. I guess they were touching on other things, but it was the Douglas Murray show, or rather the Douglas Murray fan page, and he was speaking on the Esther Kraku show. Apologies if I'm mispronouncing her name, because honestly I'm not familiar with her. Esther, Krakue, not sure how that's pronounced, but anyway, he was touching on the Greta Thunberg phenomenon. Now, before I get into that, I think he was spot on, but one person was criticising the fact that he was talking to an echo chamber, because presumably his page is going to be his supporters. And if you don't know who Douglas Murray is, he's a somewhat conservative commentator, journalist, and I don't know if you call him an activist, but he's pretty outspoken. I've followed his work from his criticism of pan-Islamism as an ideology, so I am familiar with Douglas Murray. Anyway, what he said about the Greta Thunberg phenomenon I think is absolutely spot on, but this idea that, he's only speaking to his echo chamber, it may be true, but that's kind of the pot calling the kettle black. Because if you look at pro-Greta Thunberg pages, or anything that's pro-Greta Thunberg, there's absolutely no space for dissent. It literally is, the personality cult embodied. Now, what he said was that they are... Actually, what Esther said was she's kind of like Hello Kitty with a gun, which I thought was quite funny. But he made the point, this is kind of a game they're playing. I mean, what if he found a 14-year-old boy, this is quoting him, a 14-year-old Danish boy who's for fossil fuels, does Greta then have to shut up? Because she's older and she's, does she then lose a moral argument? Most of the criticism of Greta Thunberg hasn't been actually ad hominem. It hasn't been about her appearance or her autism, although I do suspect that her autism is being used by her supporters. And I know people with autism who take issue with her hiding behind it, or at least her supporters using it as a way to deflect criticism of her. I know there has been some really personalised attacks, and that's wrong. That never wins an argument. It's just it's the wrong approach to take, and some of it has been quite nasty. But it is her supporters that have put her on this pedestal, that have put her on the world stage, that have made her one of the most famous people of 2019. The way I see it is that if it is okay for her to stand up at the UN in New York City and literally berate and yell at world leaders, then it is valid for her to be questioned. Because she isn't always going to be 16, right? She's going to be a young woman soon. She's going to be an adult. And in the adult world, it's give and take. Her supporters are not tolerant. Her supporters do endorse a personality cult. And my basis for saying personality cult is, this isn't just that she's admired. She is being turned into a cult figure. Her image adorns t-shirts, posters, graffiti. She's all over the world. She's become... an absolute saint within the movement. She can do no wrong. Greta says this, Greta says that. If she's merely the representation of the young generation, then why so much focus on her? That would be my question. I think, for example, if she is berating world leaders, it should be okay for world leaders to say, well, excuse me, young lady, but your accusations are not fair. My government has done X, Y, and Z. There are a number of issues regarding her arguments I take issue with. A lot of it is based on the capitalist system and against the West. Whereas her critique of India and China, China in particular, which this year opened up 17 new coal mines. Where's her lambasting of those governments? It seems to be entirely focused on the West. I also have a problem with her vilification of the older generation. The older generation arguably done more in terms of personal responsibility for environmentalism than my generation, the millennials. So to vilify the older generation, the generation that brought her into the world, and okay, I know her parents are a bit off radar, but, to me that is not helpful. Greta Thunberg's message is overwhelmingly negative, and this is the problem also with Extinction Rebellion. It's sheer negativity. Their argument is the science is settled, there's no more argument, and that's it, that's what we're going to do. That's a pretty dangerous mentality in itself, because it's intolerant. It means there's no scope for dissent. Science, whilst I absolutely do feel that, don't agree with Nigel Farage, I think that the overwhelming consensus among scientists is that human activity influences the rate of climate change. But I'm not an expert on this. I don't claim to be so. I need to do my homework. I need to do more research, and science is constantly developing. So Extinction Rebellion and Greta Thunberg supporters cannot say it's not constantly developing and we're not constantly getting new information, because we are. But this is the problem. They cannot claim, they cannot say, oh, but you can criticise her. You can't. I'm a 34-year-old man. If I criticise Greta Thunberg, her supporters will immediately punch on that and say, oh, you're a misogynist, you're insecure. And this is how they pigeonhole critics. And whilst that may account for a small minority of her critics who maybe are trolling, and I don't think that's a good idea, because it just lends into the stereotype that they want. There are a lot of people that find her very arrogant. I mean, she seems to think she has a right to just yell at people. I think she has a very bad attitude. Where she'll sort of backtrack and say, oh, but I'm just a 16-year-old girl. And then she has the audacity to actually say, how dare you just destroy my future. She's from a pretty well-off background, and people say, oh, but it's metaphorical, she's talking about her generation. But if she is going to be the figurehead of this, it is valid to ask questions of her background. It is. Most people, whilst I commend her for not taking a plane to go to the UN, most people don't have the luxury of getting a solar-powered yacht. That is not the real world. That is green elitism. Most people don't have that luxury. Most people are thinking about paying the bills month on month. So what I would simply say is to her supporters, if you're going to put her in this pedestal, if you're going to put her in a leadership position, then do not say she cannot be questioned. Do not say that people don't have a right of reply. And do not try to pigeonhole all critics as being misogynists driven by insecurity. I think it is healthy for her to say her piece, and then for others to say, well, actually, Greta, you're wrong about that, or I disagree with you. But she is being put in a bubble, and if you cannot see this, you need to wake up, because that's what's happening. And you just look at Extinction Rebellion pages or her support pages, she really is being idolised. Now, my whole life, I have been against idolatry of any human being. I don't care who they are, a king, a president, or a 16-year-old activist. Anyone. Anyone that comes out with the sort of overly simplistic arguments she is making, to keep coming out with those sort of arguments and not be challenged, it's just not healthy. And her supporters need to stop. They need to make their mind up. On one hand, they say she's a strong, inspirational young woman who's telling it like it is, right? So then she's in a position of responsibility, right? If you're going to say that's her role. On the other hand, she say, oh, how dare you question her? She's a 16-year-old girl with autism. So, as Douglas Murray rightly said, they're constructing it in such a way where criticism of her is impossible. Because if you do criticise her, you'll be pigeonholed as a misogynist, as insecure. Try it. If you doubt me, try it. Go to her page and make criticism based on her arguments, not on her, the way she looks or anything, and see if you get a tolerant response. See if you get a response like, oh, well, no, I disagree with you and this is why. No, you'll get her supporters bombarding you saying, how dare you, you must be insecure, or this is another climate denier, a right-winger. Well, I'm not a climate denier, I'm not particularly right-wing, but I deeply dislike the way she has been turned into a cult figure. You know, someday she is going to have to learn that she is not above reproach, and her supporters are encouraging her to believe that she is, and that is a fundamental problem here. It's very manipulative. And actually, if you look at other youth movements, for example, if you look at March for Our Lives, which is a movement I strongly support, the young people spearheading that are not being idolised in the same way. They're not being turned into cult figures in the same way. So I'm all for youth activism. I think it's far better that young people are involved in these things than they're involved in gangs, for example. So in itself, I don't think it's a bad thing. But they also need to know that if you're going to be active, if you're going to be political, people have a right to question you.